a First Nations RCMP commissioner would do a lot towards continuing that process of addressing racism both within the RCMP and within the detachments.
Tonight, a rough week for the RCMP and its top cop.
Today has been a somber event, hence you see the markings on my face, which are, I'm in mourning of the losses in my community.
Plus, it's a grim anniversary for the Carcross First Nation as the opioid crisis continues. Good evening, Tansei Anin. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky says an investigation is underway into allegations of sexual abuse of First Nation girls in Prince George from 2000 to 2004. The RCMP has been under fire all week about an explosive report released by the RCMP Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. Now there will be a criminal investigation into the most shocking allegations that some members of the Prince George, BC detachment assaulted underage female sex trade workers about 20 years ago. In an emailed statement to APTN News, Brenda Lucky said a criminal investigation is active and being led by my RCMP colleagues in British Columbia. The investigation is adequately resourced and progressing to protect the integrity of ongoing inquiries. It would be inappropriate for me to comment further. There have been calls for Commissioner Brenda Lucky to step down over the report, and now she has announced her retirement. And of course, with Lucky stepping down, speculation has already begun as to who will replace her. Saskatchewan's Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations thinks that person should be a First Nations individual. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Dutch Lara is a vice chief with the FSIN.
We feel that a First Nations RCMP commissioner would do a lot towards continuing that process of addressing racism both within the RCMP and within the detachments. It has to start from the top up and then come through the regions and into detachments.
The Mounties have long faced charges of systemic racism in the force and mistreatment of Indigenous people. Lara admits a First Nations commissioner wouldn't solve all current problems, but it would be a positive first step.
To us, with having the top person be one of ours, our way is trust. We trust, and the fact that there'll be an individual there that is going to look after our rights as individuals, as Treaty First Nations people.
Meanwhile, the public inquiry into the Trudeau government's use of the Emergencies Act last winter released its report on Friday. The government used the act to help it rid the nation's capital of the Freedom Convoy protest, which had taken over downtown streets for about a month. And EP Matthew Green was asked if Lucky's resignation had anything to do with what is in the report.
We need to have a comprehensive review, a Royal Commission on Policing, and we need to look at the systems and the structures, and we need to have an honest discussion around the ways in which there were multiple failures and multiple breakdowns at all levels of government. I think it would be unfair to place this at one person's feet, and I'll leave whatever interpretations the Commissioner had to her departure for herself to answer.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Now, we've got more discussion later on in the show as our panel picks it apart, and as always, there is more online. The parents of an 18-month-old boy who died more than a year ago in Calgary have both been charged with manslaughter. 30-year-old Michael Sinclair and 33-year-old Sonia Pasqua were arrested yesterday over the death of their son, Gabriel Sinclair Pasqua. First responders were called to their Calgary home in October of 2021, where Gabriel was in medical distress. They gave him CPR, but he died at the scene. Calgary police have not given any other details about the charges. Sinclair and Pasqua are expected to appear in court next week. It's been just over a year since a First Nation in the Yukon declared a state of emergency. The declaration was made after 3 community members died from addiction during the first week of 2022. Now, it's hopeful new programs and services introduced in the last year will help its people move forward and heal. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
We talk about truth and reconciliation, but it's truth and reclamation.
Deputy Hasha Duheni Darla-Jean Lindstorm knows firsthand how addictions can impact communities. Last January, the Carcross First Nation was rocked by 3 community members' deaths in 6 days. In response, the First Nation declared a state of emergency in order to raise awareness about addictions. Just over 1 year later, community members gathered to honor its first anniversary.
Today has been a somber event, hence you see the markings on my face, which are, I'm in mourning of the losses in my community.
Lindstorm says many more community members have overdosed or died since the declaration. She feels Carcross citizens continue to grapple with issues like intergenerational trauma and the effects of colonization.
It's going to take a while. We lose people, not a week goes by when we hear of something.
I know this personally because I am one of those people who had to get sober.
Gary Johnson knows the issue all too well. Now sober himself, he's seen addictions take the lives of many people. He's concerned far too many youth are being influenced by drug culture.
A lot of young guys, a lot of young girls, they think it's cool to be thug and it's tough, you know. And a person who used to live in that lifestyle, it's completely opposite of that, you know. It's scary, you never know what can happen.
Carcross First Nation has taken steps in the last year to help those who are struggling.
So in the back we have not only harm reduction kits and supplies.
Health and Wellness Director Stacey Robinson-Brown says that includes creating programs and services geared towards harm reduction and treatment, like this new outreach van. Filled with harm reduction supplies, hygiene products, and snacks, the van will help fill after-hours gaps on evenings and weekends.
Not all crises happen before 4:30 in the afternoon, so being able to address this is really important.
We have to honor the people we lost and help assist the people who are still struggling.
While there's still much to do, Lindstorm says her people are trying to address the issue of addictions in a good way.
We're all here together, trying to move forward and try to meet people at where they're at and be loving and kind to each other.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Carcross.
8 Migmon communities are asserting title to areas approximately 60% the size of New Brunswick. It expands a claim made by Elsie Buktuk in 2016. In parts of New Brunswick, the new claim overlaps territory claimed by the Wolastoqey in 2021. In a press statement, the Wolastoqey say they support the Migmon claim and are working towards creating a wampum belt to signify that support. All right, we have to step aside for a moment. We'll have more news when we come back. Welcome back to APTN National News. With her rank and file under scrutiny this week, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky announced her retirement. Our esteemed panel of journalists discussed these matters and more with Dennis Ward earlier, Carrie Benjo in Regina, and Nigon Sinclair in Winnipeg.
Carrie, Nigon, great to have our distinguished APTN panel back. Carrie, let's start with you and the news this week that Brenda Lucky is stepping down as Commissioner of the RCMP. What do you make of that?
I really think it was a smart move on her part. The news coming out is not positive, and I think she knew that there was no alternative. There was no way out of this, and for her to take I see it as a sign of accountability. She's taking accountability for her lack of actions, and so she's taking her medicine, and she's like, I'm stepping down, and she's giving up a position that she has built her whole entire life and career around, and so it was expected.
Migmon, what's your take on the RCMP commissioner stepping down?
Absolutely. I mean, it's time. I mean, this is typical to the RCMP. They sort of use a commissioner, chew her up, spit her out, or in this case, her first ever female RCMP head in history. But let's give Brenda Lucky some credit where credit's due here. Brenda Lucky, if we think back to when she started in the position, the RCMP was in the midst of 2 class action scandals for harassment and sexual abuse of women officers and civilian members within the service. And so certainly Brenda Lucky has handled that issue, and particularly we don't hear as much within the service itself as what was clearly a very toxic culture. And that's what she vowed to do. When she was appointed in 2018, that's what she vowed to promise to do. And that she herself had said that there was a deeply ingrained problem within the RCMP. The problem, of course, is that since then, and almost with the beginning of the pandemic, things really went off the rails for Brenda Lucky. There was a point in which she couldn't define systemic racism, but then later said it was within the RCMP. Of course, there's all the debacle involving whether the Emergencies Act was appropriate during the Ottawa occupation. And then, of course, you know, where was the RCMP in all of that? They were quite absent. And then, of course, some of the other major scandals involving the RCMP out on the East Coast in terms of shootings, in terms of Saskatchewan, where was the use of the RCMP and the intervention within the shootings in James Smith Cree Nation? And you know, the absolutely egregious situations involving officers and Indigenous communities throughout the country. I mean, the fact is that the RCMP really hasn't changed its outward-looking relationship with communities, particularly with Indigenous communities. And so Brenda Lucky did not do her job in that regard. She did her job perhaps dealing with some of the internal work within the RCMP, but externally, it's the same old RCMP that continues to produce more harm or as much harm as any good that they produce.
Carrie, Migmon's listing off a number of things there. Of course, many things going on under Lucky's time at the helm here, including recently this explosive report from the Civilian Complaints Commission that found RCMP officers in Prince George may have engaged with underage Indigenous sex workers. What are your thoughts on that, and what should happen there?
I think they know the names of the officers who perpetuated these crimes against these young women, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be held accountable. They know that they did wrong. This report was written. Why not? You know, we have people calling on the federal government to prosecute those who were involved in residential schools. Why aren't they being charged? There has been measures taken to prosecute those who were involved in the Holocaust. And we have present-day people who are perpetuating crimes on vulnerable people, and yet they're still allowed to walk freely without any consequences. I think prosecuting them, and that will go a long way in showing that the RCMP actually do care to protect Indigenous people.
Migmon, many people have laid the blame of the RCMP's relationship with Indigenous peoples at Lucky's feet. Do you think that's fair, and do you think things will change now that we're going to see a change in Commissioner?
I'd like to be optimistic. You know, as someone who, you know, to be full disclosure, I've been asked by the RCMP to act on their National Advisory Board. I've rejected that request. It is certainly, I think there is intention and there's an awareness within the RCMP, even at the higher echelons, that the relationships between the police officers, RCMP, and Indigenous communities are in so many ways toxic, but they're also often set up to fail. I mean, they aren't resourced appropriately, and oftentimes it takes days for an officer, when called, to come to a community. So in some cases, some communities have a very acrimonious and divisive relationship with the RCMP. So it's kind of toxic from the beginning. But at the same time, you hear what Carrie's talking about, which is the egregious situation of officers and their conduct. I think that there needs to be a massive overhaul in the way that the culture of the RCMP, how they recruit, how do they get officers from the very first days, and then particularly that we have the situation of officers who are forced to go into situations where they're frankly completely inept. They don't understand colonialism, they don't understand the way the Indian Act works, and then what they're forced to do is to deal with things in a very reactive way and not a proactive way. And so the RCMP has to overhaul its training methods from the ground up, and then also has to make sure that officers are accountable when there's incidents like this.
Carrie, Migmon, we'll have to leave it there, but it's great to see you both. Appreciate you taking some time for us.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks.
If you're not a fan of the cold, you may want to look away now, because this upcoming story about a wintertime adventure on Snowmobile isn't for the faint of heart. Here's Lindsay Richardson with a sneak peek.
50-something Indigenous riders, 4,500 kilometers of ancestral territory in just 3 weeks. This journey on Snowmobile is far from just a typical boys' trip.
There are strong messages behind all of this. It needs courage, and I think that's what our people need to see.
After 2 years of preparation, the first ever First Nations expedition took off this week. We'll have more on who's riding and why coming up on APTN National News.
Welcome back to APTN National News. It's time now for our photo of the day. Today's picture comes from Kathleen Martins, enjoying the brisk air on a ferry ride from Vancouver to the Sunshine Coast. That's a great photo there, Kathleen. How are you spending your long weekend? We'd sure like to know. Make sure you take pictures and send them to share@aptn.ca, or you can tag APTN News on Instagram. Starting on the East Coast, 3 degrees in St. John's and -3 in Halifax. -25 in Snow and Kuujjuaq and -17 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -6 in Quebec City and -3 in Montreal. -3 in Toronto and -8 in Sault Ste. Marie. -3 in Timmins and -7 in Sioux Lookout. -30 in Churchill and -16 in God's Lake. -9 in Snow and Barons River and -3 in Winnipeg. -4 in Yorkton with snow and -5 in Saskatoon. -15 in Buffalo Narrows and -27 in Stony Rapids. As we head west, -22 in Fort Chipewyan and -7 in Peace River. 0 degrees with snow in Edmonton and +2 in Calgary. 7 degrees in Vancouver and 6 in Bella Coola. 8 degrees in Sandspit and 5 in Prince Rupert. -13 in Snow and Beaver Creek and -19 in Rock River. -25 in Norman Wells and -34 in Yellowknife. -34 in Colville Lake and -24 in Inuvik. Snow and -37 in Cambridge Bay and -39 in Chesterfield. -34 in Arctic Bay and -34 in Iqaluit. It's only February, but preparations for high school graduation ceremonies are happening right now. And if one Manitoba organization can help it, cost won't be a barrier for Indigenous youth wanting to look and feel their best for the occasion. CTV's Nicole Dubé explains.
This is the kind of delivery that gets everyone excited at Mama Wichita. Kathy Hebert has been slowly collecting special donations that will be paid forward. And she has just the person in mind for this surprise.
Another dress dropped off.
Wrapped inside the bag is a gorgeous graduation gown. And if student Taylor Quill wants, it can be hers to wear to her graduation ceremony.
My inner child was screaming.
It's beautiful.
That is.
Touching the fabric, eyeing the sparkles, a tangible sign graduation is near for the student who once thought she never would.
When I was a teenager, I didn't think I was going to graduate. I had a kid when I was 16, so it was really hard trying to graduate, so I dropped out. And so I really never thought, and I struggled with getting back into school.
But she did, and will soon receive her high school diploma from the Manitoba Institute of Trades and Technology.
I'm going to feel just relieved and very happy because this is one of my big goals that I wanted to achieve for so long, and I get to finally achieve it.
And she'll receive that honor dressed as she's always dreamed of.
Oh, and then this one. I like this one because of the back.
Thanks to the dress and suit drive Hebert is organizing for Indigenous grads.
It's a big day for graduation day, and just to get these girls in dresses and make them feel the most beautiful and amazing and accomplished for everything the barriers they overcome, everything. So I knew this is something we could do. We just needed a few kind hearts to help us do it.
Hebert is thrilled to see a colorful display of donations growing at the Mamaway Center on King Street. After seeing her children graduate high school, she saw a big need to help outfit Indigenous youth, especially those who live in the inner city.
You know, their dresses were a little bit more simple, and their hair wasn't done, you know, quite the same as everybody else's, their makeup, that kind of stuff. So I just thought that going with this program moving forward, that there's something that we could do.
Beautiful footwear is also being collected. And to complete the formal look, Hebert is also looking for local hair and makeup artists to donate their time.
So I just hope they just have that, you know, just that polished look, like just that Cinderella feeling, or however, you know, they may, yeah, it's just to get their hair and makeup done and just make them that extra special for that day.
Oh, I didn't see this.
Quill hasn't decided on the perfect dress yet, but to have the choice is a dream come true.
I'm so happy they given that for like the grads, because graduation for Indigenous really is a big thing, and it's really grateful that they do this, like having the nice princess dresses. Those are almost every girl's dream.
One she'll get to share with her 8-year-old daughter.
She's gonna love it. She's really like supportive, and she was really happy to hear that I was getting one, because she's really like my biggest supporter.
With community support, Hebert hopes the gown and suit drive at Mamaway will be able to outfit as many Indigenous students and Two-Spirit grads as possible. Nicole Dubé, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Well, it's great to see an initiative like that. It certainly puts a smile on your face. I think that's a great way to end our show for this Friday edition of APTN National News. If you missed any of our stories tonight, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, for more. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great weekend.